I think we've pulled everybody in who is in the waiting room. Okay, welcome. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I'm the editor of My Jewish Learning, and we are here to celebrate having just completed the study of Sefer Bereshit, of Genesis, the very first book in the Torah. And it's a fun scene because, of course, Jews worldwide are all studying Genesis together. And so everywhere around the world, people are celebrating the end of, or have just concluded this book. And it's also, I think, going to be really fun because Genesis is one of possibly the most read books of the Hebrew Bible. It is just really, really beloved. If you go to a library, the number of commentaries on this first book of the Bible are just so extensive. It has so many really wonderful stories, and is just a really beloved book of the Jewish people. A Siyum is an event that celebrates the end of a unit of study. And so today's Siyum is a little bit of an experiment. There's sort of like a Jewish celebration of the whole Torah that we do in the fall. That's called Simchat Torah. And we celebrate reading the entire Torah, but we thought that we would try an experiment and celebrate each book as we conclude it and take that as an opportunity to look back at these books as a whole. I think so many Jews study Torah through the lens of weekly parsha that there aren't as many opportunities to really step back and think about a larger unit of Torah. So that's part of what we're going to do today. I'm going to introduce our three presenters in a minute. But first, I would love for you to introduce yourselves in the comments. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, where you're joining us from today. Are you a regular reader of our daily newsletter? Are you a reader of our weekly Parsha newsletter, which this year is written by Rabbi Chaim Herring, who is going to be joining us in a minute? Are you coming to us from our daily Talmud Daf Yomi study groups? Is this your very first MJL class? We'd love to know. And while you're introducing yourself, the other thing I'd like you to think about is what your impressions of Bereshit were in studying it in the last few months. Was this your first encounter with the book of Genesis? Was it your 37th encounter? Was it different for you this time? Did something stand out to you? What did you love? What troubled you? What questions do you have for our panelists? We are going to have some time toward the end of this program for a little bit of Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on the comments to see what people have to say about this book, and we would love to hear your thoughts. But now I'm going to turn to introducing our panelists today. So first, I'm going to introduce Rabbi Chaim Herring. Chaim, would you give them a little wave there? Say
hey,
hello.
Everybody from Minneapolis.
From Minneapolis. Okay, Rabbi Chaim Herring is not just a rabbi, but also a PhD in organizational management. He has worked in the Jewish community for 40 years, including as the executive director of STAR, that's Synagogues Transformation and Renewal. And he is working on a book called L'Dor Vador in a Digital Age. But in addition to all that, many of you may know him as a regular contributor to our weekly Kaddish Minyan, and also as our Torah commentary writer this year. He's writing an entire series of commentaries on the weekly Parsha through the lens of grief and loss. So we're really happy to have you here, Rabbi Chaim.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Liana Wertman. Liana, would you give everyone a wave there? Great. Okay, there she is. Liana is the founder and executive director of the Torah Studio, which is a Jewish learning center that seeks to share the nourishing tools and practice of Torah study with as many people as possible, including we're up to about 150 people here today. She has a Master's of Educational Leadership from HUC JIR, and has learned at Pardes and Svara and Yashrut's Classic Talmud program. And she also loves to make art with yarn from her home in Los Angeles. Is that where you're joining us from today? Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. And we are also joined today by Rabbi Asher Lopatin.
Hey, everybody.
All right. Rabbi Asher has ordination from Rav Soloveitchik. He is the founding rabbi of Congregation Kehilat Eitz Chaim in Detroit. He's the executive director of the JCRC/AJC there. He's a former president of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah And he is also one half of a new podcast called Rabbi Lawyer Bar. A rabbi and a lawyer walk into a bar, which he does with John Geringer. He also contributes regularly to our Daf Yomi siyums that we do after each tractate of Talmud, if you join us for that. Okay, so let's get on to the content here. Each of them has some reflections on the book of Genesis. We're going to start with Rabbi Chaim Herring, who is going to speak to us about relationships in the book of Genesis, family relationships. Go ahead, Rabbi Herring.
Hey, everybody. It's so nice to be here. And I want to thank My Jewish Learning, Rachel, Mara, not just them, but I've worked with so many. I was actually there at the beginning of My Jewish Learning when Edgar Bronfman of blessed memory said to me during one meeting, I think he was one of the funders. I think that My Jewish Learning is going to turn out to be my most important philanthropic contribution. And I don't think there are many people who know that, but I heard that from him, and boy, was he right. So it's wonderful to be with all of you. I've been teaching on Sundays and participating in the Daily Kaddish Minyan, Torah Through Grief and Loss. I've been teaching, for almost 2 years. I lost both of my parents in the fall. And through that experience of loss, I began to look at the Torah differently. You know, wherever we sit, our vantage point determines what we see. And having a back-to-back loss certainly was, aside from rather shocking and very painful, it was eye-opening. Whether or not you experience a loss of a loved one, loss is common. We felt that especially over the past couple of years with COVID. And I think we're all sensitive to the varieties of different kinds of loss, as well as the lovely things that have happened along the way, like this kind of teaching. So that's my perspective. And, you know, when Rachel wrote to me, or Mara, whoever it was first, and spoke about the siyum, I thought, wow, I have never looked holistically from start to finish at the book of Breshit. So I want to thank you for that. And I'm going to do it for Shmot and the rest of the Tanakh. And here's what I saw that I had never seen before. There is an incredible symmetry, beginning with Breshit, which has both confrontation and reconciliation. The reconciliation is never perfect, but it happens. And the book of Breshit actually ends with not an exactly, as I said, perfect reconciliation, but it ends also on the theme of forgiveness. Now, let me just run through that quickly. What do I have, about 3 more minutes?
You're just fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. We have
right.
One of the first comments was somebody who was interested in these larger patterns that repeat. So this is perfect.
Oh, great. So let's talk about pre-Abraham and Sarah. Right away, and this is it's so telling about human nature. God gives Adam and Eve only one rule to obey. That's it. And of course, we know what happens. They're not able to just follow this one divine request. By the way, that's why it's never good to give children just like, do just this one thing and you'll be okay, because that's not realistic. It's also not realistic in adults. And yet there's reconciliation. True, Adam and Eve are banished from the garden, but they're not destroyed. And in fact, there's a loving act that God performs by, making sure that they have some clothing to go out into the world. There's also another midrash on how in the next generation, Adam learns from his son Cain about God's forgiveness. Adam and Eve also reconcile. They have another child. and Cain, who commits the first act of murder, although I'm not really sure he knew what he was doing. Remember, there had never been a murder before. You know, they had a fight. But even then, God's punishment is for Cain to wander, and yet he settles and founds a city, certainly a sign of reconciliation. Now let's get to our founding families. I don't like to call them ancestors. Yeah, of course they are. Right? That sounds too cold and impersonal. These are my people, right? I came from them. That means they have some wisdom to teach me as well. We look at Abraham and Sarah, and of course, Hagar, right? And with 2 children, it created quite a bit of conflict. So we see conflict in that generation already. And yet, later on, we also see reconciliation. If you take a look, for example, at Genesis chapter 25, verses 8 through 11, the children come back to bury their father. It appears that Isaac settles near Ishmael as well. So clearly there's some, I would say, again, it's not perfect harmony, but there's not a rupture. Next generation, Yaakov and Esav. That one didn't go very well. And yet we sometimes forget that Esav lovingly comes out to greet Yaakov after they're reunited. I mean, it's a genuine, heartfelt hug, kiss, tears, the whole works. And again, the brothers come back together to bury their fathers. They must have had some sort of connection, because how else would they know to do that? The most problematic figure for me is Yaakov, is Jacob. I'm not sure that he ever makes peace with his life and with the loss that he had. And we see that when he gives the blessing, the charge at the end of days that will happen to his sons. A lot of anger comes out that is not really ever resolved. While he had a chance to do so, he did not. And then, of course, before that point, when Yaakov dies, there is a significant reconciliation, both between Joseph and Jacob, right? Now, Joseph may have been the favored son. I'm not sure he liked it so much in retrospect, because when he had a chance to contact his father, and think about it, he was like VP of Egypt, and he didn't even bother to reconnect with his father. So I'm not sure that it was, in retrospect, such a great mitzvah to be like the firstborn. But they do reconcile. I mean, Yaakov just, Yosef breaks down when he sees his father. And you can hear in his interactions with his brothers how much he cares for them. And of course, Yosef is able to reframe slavery, that enslavement, that difficult period, that separation from his family, that rupture from his family that eventually heals, by reframing his experience as understanding himself, yes, as a family member, but also as an instrument for a greater plan that God has in store. So I would leave you with these 2 points. Judaism in Breshit, and I like today too, although we have different definitions of family, is transmitted through family. That's a unit of transmission. It's important in Breshit, and I would say in our own lives, right, that if we rupture our relationships within our families, both the ones we're born into and the one that we choose to create, there's no vehicle for transmitting Yahadut, Judaism, to the next generation. So yes, let's try to reconcile with family members while they're alive. Easier said than done sometimes, but generally worth the effort. If that doesn't happen, we can forgive ourselves for the lost opportunities to mend a relationship. Even after a loved one passes away, we take the best of their values and we bring them into our lives. And I think the best way to honor loved ones, both those who have passed on and those who are alive, is really to make sure that we enjoy our relationships and that we remove the hurts and the stumbling blocks that get in the way and do our best to reconcile. And that, with that, except for Harry and William, are you listening? I will end there. Thank you.
I'm sure we have several royals and former royals on the call. Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. One thing you made me think, one thing I thought about this time around in Breshit is just what a disaster the world is from the first, in the beginning. You go, Genesis 1 is great. Like everything is really good. And it says over and again, the world is good, the world is good, and the world is good. And then it almost all falls apart almost immediately.
I just have to say that in other cultures, it does fall apart. What's important here is that, again, it's confrontation and reconciliation.
Yes. Yes. But, that scene with Noah where God floods the whole world and we go back to almost the primordial chaos again, right? And it's just one tiny seed that makes it through to restart everything. But one thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking also, you made me think about is Cain and Abel are the original brothers, right? And that's maybe the one case where that's the one case where we don't get reconciliation. And at least there is I think a measure of improvement as we go down through the generations, which is somewhat hopeful. What do you think? Oh, you're on mute.
You're talking to an optimist.
Uh-huh.
So I think there's always an opportunity for improvement.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are going to move on to Liana, who is going to talk to us about the theme of covenant that keeps resurfacing throughout this book.
Hi, good morning. It's morning for me. It might be nighttime wherever you are, but hi, everyone. My name is Liana Wertman. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you to Rachel and Mara for inviting me to be here today. And I am excited to talk about the book of Genesis because it's been something that has been sticking in my mind for a few years now, mostly because it confuses me a lot. And I'm going to say here right now that I'm in love with this book. So any negative things that I'm about to say do not actually mean that I don't like it. So just know that. Because I am, if you can tell through the screen, a woman. I'm young. I am things you can't tell through the screen, queer and a leftist. I am all of the things that would normally make you think like, why would that person be studying Torah? Does she not know what's inside of it? And the answer is you're right. It does freak me out sometimes, especially in the book of Genesis, a book that sometimes I think doesn't necessarily need to be there because we're not a full people. As Chaim beautifully said, we're a family in that moment, not going from one person to the next. And only in Exodus do we really become a full people. So clearly Genesis is trying to tell us something beyond just what it means to be a people. And the first person that God picks in our family is just a random guy, like a guy that God seems to pick up off of the street in his homeland and gives this major blessing to. And the very first thing that this man does with this divine blessing is not trust God enough and sell his wife into slavery. And he doesn't do that once, he does it 2 different times. He is not a person that I like very much. Abraham is someone who bothers me. He makes me a little mad because he's not a person that I look up to right off the bat. As a person with all of my identities, nothing about him at first glance makes me think like, oh, this is the person that I want leading me. Because if you've read it closely, you know what I'm talking about. It happens a lot. And so it freaked me out. But I live in an age where I am in a mindset that I believe that God wants me to see myself in Torah, that I am a person who Torah was written for. And so when I get angry at Torah, I never turn away from it. I dive deeper into it. And so what I did when I dove deeper into it was find so much meaning in why God gave us not just 1, but 4 different, pretty not perfect patriarchs to follow. And that is what I'm going to talk about today, because they are the people who teach us, and I think who teach God what covenant is. Because God was looking for a relationship with human beings from the very first moment that God created them, and kept finding something that wasn't right? There was a total lack of relationship. There was an absolute ignoring, a dismissal of, an attempt to try to equal God, all of these different things. None of it was what God was looking for in relationship with human beings. And Abraham, this imperfect person that makes me angry, just like lots of people do in the normal world, because he is a normal person, talked back to God, decided that God was not just this being that he could love and admire, but was also a being that he had to be in relationship with. That relationship was the core part of covenant, that was the difference between everyone who had come before him and everyone who really would come after him. Because Abraham, when God promised him wealth and family and land, didn't just sit around and wait for God to do it for him, sat there and really moved out into the world and took that for himself and actively engaged in the blessing that God gave him. He also, in chapter 15, and this was something that my class this year, I have the blessing of teaching a Parsha class every week. I've been doing it for 2 years, plus a third round of Genesis already. And we talked about chapter 15 of Genesis, where Abraham comes back to God and God's like, you are going to have a blessing, I promise you. And Abraham doesn't just say, thanks, I appreciate it. Abraham says, hold up, you promised me a son and I haven't seen that yet. Abraham is like, you need to be a part of this covenant, God. And then Abraham sets out these pieces of animals and does this interesting ritual that we know from historical context happens in other cultures, where you have to walk through the carcasses of these animals to bind yourself to a covenant. But if you read closely, Abraham isn't the one that walks through those pieces. The flame of God moves through those pieces, and Abraham binds God into covenant with him. This is so awesome, because it means that we are such an active part of covenant. Because at no point in Exodus, like Chaim said, we don't get laws and rules in this section. We're just getting a call to be in relationship with the divine. And we see this with Isaac, another model, a very different model, one who models for us when deep trauma and anger and hurt keeps us at a somewhat of a distance from God without actually leaving God alone. Jacob shows us how to engage with God through our own power and might and interest. He doesn't say to God, I'm in, sounds good, thanks for the blessing. He says, prove to me that this is something that I should be a part of, and then I will be a part of it. And it's in that action of forcing himself to be a part of this covenant that I believe he is able to surpass this one son at a time into all of his children owning the blessings of God and all of his children owning this, because he takes it onto himself. And then, of course, we have Joseph, who I think is maybe confusingly the most relatable of all three of these versions of God, of relationship with God, because God never speaks to Joseph. Right? The last 10 chapters, God does speak to Jacob in that time, but never speaks to Joseph. And yet he is the character of Torah that allows us to see what just true belief that God is with you can do. And so we don't get in Genesis, I believe, these perfect models of how to live a perfect life with God. We get these incredible models of how to have complicated, deep, personal and important relationships with the divine that we might cycle through in our own lives or stick with one. And it is a book that really teaches us not just how to be the people, but how to be ourselves in that covenant. And so that is why I love this book and will always have a fun relationship and excitement when it comes back around. So I think that's it for me right now.
Thank you, Liana. Your comments are resonating with people in the comments section here. Especially, I think people are moved by that first comment that when the Torah makes you mad, you dive deeper. I occasionally have the privilege of teaching sorry about the siren in the background, teaching the Hebrew Bible as literature at some local universities. And I'm always struck that students come in with the expectation that every character will be a perfect model to emulate, and that everything will feel wonderful when we read it, that's what they expect from a religious text. But of course, that's not how Jewish religious texts work at all, right? We are Yisrael. We are the people who literally struggle with God and struggle with our text. And it also is, in that struggle is where these things, I think, become worthwhile. If these folks are just impossible models to emulate, then what relationship do they have to me? I'm so imperfect. And what is there to even talk about then, right? They're very real, and they are sometimes very troubling. And that's where it gets interesting, I think. So thank you for illuminating that for us and highlighting that. Let me see, I'm toggling between too many screens. Okay, one other comment that came through while you were talking that I thought was worth highlighting, since we are thinking about larger themes that appear through the chapter, is this idea of chosenness. Of course, Am Yisrael, or think of ourselves as a chosen people, but there's a lot of chosenness in Breshit, in the book of Genesis. There's the first people, and then there are all these firstborns who maybe should be in line for specialness, but then get subverted by younger siblings who end up being in line for, and always that it seems to cause just as much trouble as it does good things. And so there's a lot to think about there in terms of what it means to be chosen, and what are the good aspects, and what are the problems of it, and why do we have it, and what does it do for us? So I just wanted to highlight that comment really quickly. And now I would like to turn the virtual microphone over to Rabbi Asher, who is going to hone in on perhaps one of the most iconic stories in the book of Breshit for us, and let us revisit it through these larger lenses. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks so much. And Liana and Rav Chaim, thanks so much for your Torah. Liana studies, I see at Yashrut, which is an incredible institution in Israel. And, with all issues coming out with Israel, and we can all disagree politically, Yashrut is dedicated under Rabbi Danny Landy's, sorry to give a plug, but it's really dedicated to truth and justice and ethics. And that this book, by the way, Breshit, is called Sefer HaYashar, is really called this book of being straight and being honest. And even though, as Liana mentioned, characters were imperfect, and Rav Chaim's talking about how, well, some of them killed each other, but there's a struggle, there's a goal, there's a standard of yashrut, of uprightness, of heading in the right direction. And we always have to keep that standard there. I do want to focus on the Akedah, which is chapter 22 of Genesis. The Akedah means the binding of Isaac. That might actually be the most insignificant part of it, that he's actually bound. But I guess the implication is that Abraham was really ready to do it. So this is not, okay, we'll go for a walk and we'll see what happens. But they actually get up to the mountain, and Isaac is bound. So this looks like it's really going to happen. And even the knife is taken out. I think that it means so much to me in so many ways. I've started reading it. I was actually inspired by a student of Elie Wiesel, who talked about his reading this. This is in the prayer, and the Siddur, and the traditional Siddur, for every day, saying it every day. It's part of the section of both korbanot, of sacrifices, because we believe we have replaced sacrifices with our words. And it's also related to the part of the prayer of Kabbalat Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. And that's sort of the classic understanding, I would say, of the Akedah, is Abraham accepting the divine will. And sometimes people say, this is my Akedah. What is your Akedah? Judaism looks, problematic. The life is problematic, but it's my challenge. It's my Akedah. And I actually read it very differently. I read it with the commentary of Rashi and the Midrashim that really say that, look, not taking away from Avraham that, he's devoted to God. God bless him, willing to sacrifice his son to be devoted to God. But he maybe mishears God's command. And again, this is Rashi, the great commentary on the Chumash. So you can't, you gotta, contend with him. You can reject it, but you gotta contend with him. He quotes the Midrash that God said, I never told you to kill your son. Of course, the text says, Ha'alehu le'olah, raise him al, like el al, to go up. Take him up to be an offering. And what I really think one of the great struggles in Judaism and in our lives is determining what is really God's will for me. What is the right thing to do? Of course, I want to do, and I'm an Orthodox Jew, I want to do God's will. I believe in God. I believe in God's commandedness. I want to do what God wants, but it's not always clear in our tradition what is the halacha, what is the law, what is God's will. And it's not good enough to say, well, Nebuch, what can I do? That's what God wants me to do. No, maybe it's not what God wants me to do. That makes it very difficult, but I love that challenge where in the end of the day, God did not want Abraham, it seems, to sacrifice his son. The other part that I really love about the Akedah is there is a father-son, parent-child tenderness that comes up in the middle of when Yitzchak talks to his father, and we don't get Yitzchak talking so much. That he says, "Vayomer Avi." Finally, he speaks up, and are we speaking up enough? And the father, Avraham, finally, and again, Rav Chaim talked about a lot of the relationships that are not so easy, familial relationships, but here Avram says, Vayomer hineni v'ni, I am here for you, my son. So even though within that cloud of doing God's work, he understands that I still have to be there for my son. And I think that I was just today speaking to people who their kids are on a very different Jewish journey than they are, or no Jewish journey. And within that cloud of our journey, we have to make sure that we're always saying, Avi, my father, hineni b'ni, I am here for you, my son. So I just love, that tenderness that is in the story. And finally, I love that some academics, in a beautiful way, sort of take out the angel at the end. So when, Abraham's about to slaughter his son, the angel says, no, don't do that, Abraham. You're great. I know you're great. It's just a test. Don't do that. It doesn't say just a test. It's just don't do that, Abraham. And then it says Abraham, and I never really understood this, the whole ram. He finds a ram that gets caught in the thicket and sacrifices the ram tachat le'olah vayaleu le'olah tachat beno, instead of his son. Some people interpret this as saying, even without the angel, Abraham could have said, what God wants me to do is offer a sacrifice, replacing instead of my son. So sometimes I'm not, I don't know, I'm not so into sacrifices. I don't know who is, but Maimonides wasn't so into sacrifices. But the idea here is this is the beginning of the rabbinic tradition of saying, God tells me, Abraham thought, to sacrifice my son. I understand it, that it means to offer a sacrifice instead, replacing my son, killing my son. Thank God, now we have this rabbinic tradition. We have what David Hartman calls an interpretive tradition. Sometimes when we hear something, we see something in our tradition, sometimes we have to put on our interpretive gear and really to understand it in a different way, just like Avraham eventually models. So it's sort of the beginning of that rabbinic interpretive tradition, interpreting what God really wanted. last word, and really it is the last word in chapter 22, speaking about different figures in the Bible, in Genesis, in this book, in Breshit. The last word, who gets the last word of this parsha? Macha. It lists a whole bunch of names of the concubine of Nahor, who gave birth, and or Bethuel, and Macha gets mentioned. I don't know what her life was like. I don't know where she went. I don't think there are any midrashim about her, but she's in Breshit. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm amongst all the giants and these big figures, and they're doing so many amazing things in the world. But even Macha makes it into the Torah, into Breshit. And Breshit cares about not just the iconic figures, but even the Machas. Everyone is important. Every human being is a Tselem Elokim. Excuse me. And Macha gets to end off this very powerful story of Abraham and Isaac. So when we're feeling like Machas, don't worry, we're still players in the game.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing those long genealogies in to us. I think it's tempting when we read it to just skip right over those, because it is interesting that these incredibly crafted stories, like the Akedah, which is so carefully crafted, every word carefully chosen and multi-resonant, are then interspersed with these long genealogies of these people that we then don't hear much else about, right? Which tells you, which has something to say about the priorities of the text. And including those people. We have about 10 minutes now for an opportunity to have a little bit of discussion. So what I would actually like to invite people to do is to put up their virtual hands. If you would like to comment on any of these stimulating conversations, if you have something you wanted to bring to the conversation, and we would love to share your thoughts. If you have questions for our presenters, what did you think of the book of Genesis? Did it frustrate you? Did it make you fall in love? Are you what are you thinking? What was your favorite part? Okay, let's see. I'm going to hand it over here to Josh Saltzman, who has a hand up.
Hello. Thank you to you, and it's great to be here today with everybody. I'm going to try to make this as succinct as possible. It's kind of an observation, and I'd like to hear the reactions of the speakers, or you, or the other people. Rashi begins his commentary on the Torah by saying, Darsheni, interpret me. And the question is, and the rabbi who spoke previously, mentioned the interpretive tradition. But I think that we have to examine what the interpretive tradition is, because we have a tendency in our God talk and in our interpretive talk to ontotheologize, or to talk about God claims, like God says this, or God wants me to do that, or the tendency to see certain progression in the text and then have an answer or a solution to the question raised, as opposed to allowing for certain opening. And I would say that one way to avoid that is to understand on a really deep level, and I think you alluded to this, the narrative nature of the text, which comes from a long tradition of oral literature to written literature, and is constantly being reinterpreted, and that the different layers that are taking place in the text have to be considered on a more contextual basis in terms of their specific message than trying to make some universal or generalized statement about God or the text in general. So that's kind of not a question, but it is a question. I'd like to hear the response. Did I make sense? Is it?
Yeah. You're talking about the imperative to interpret.
Yeah, and the way in which we go about interpreting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
I
can
see
be
Liana
problematic.
nodding her head. Would you like to respond, Liana?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you were also a student of Robert Alter and his understanding of narrative Torah.
Among other people, yeah. But
among other people, but I'm on the same page. I think that the narrative aspect of Torah really allows us to engage with it as a piece, not just of divine art. And the fact that there's this thing that is static, but that changes so constantly in itself and in our own minds and over time while staying the same is, to me, like the proof of divine, the fact that it is a divine text. To me, like, it's that mix. I think often we talk about, like, when we add context and when we look at it as literature, it often removes the divinity or removes kind of this idea that God is a part of it. We make it very human, but I find that it actually deepens that for me, that it really allows me to find more allowance to interpret while also feeling very beholden to the tradition and the past of interpretation as well.
And if I can end very, very quickly, first of all, it's a great question. I would say a couple of things. Number one, I know there are people who have very strong opposite opinions, but if we didn't read Torah in context, then I think as a people, we would have become frozen in time. The oral tradition, which includes Midrash, right, is a conversation both with the original, our foundational text, but also throughout the ages. So I think that we can make a limited number of general statements, but I think for me, the oral tradition is so rich, which includes commentaries down to today, not because of the answers that it gives, but because of the questions that it raises about our relationship with God, with other people, with our family members. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I see, Esther Westelman, you have a physical hand up rather than a virtual hand. Would you like to make a comment here?
Yeah, well, first of all, in regard to having a different opinion, I think this is the beauty of Torah, that we have so many interpretations. And you talk about responsibility. I think the Torah says that we are in the image of God. In other words, we have to act as if we were God. And to me, Sefer Bereshit, beside all the conflict, comes the expression Elu ve'elu. In one hand, we have so many questions about what's there. And on the other hand, we have the expression that comes Ashrei ha'am shekacha lo. So it seems conflicting, but it is really what the Torah is all about. It's this and that. There are no perfect questions and no perfect interpretation.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rachel, and I'll go after you.
No, Asher, go.
Well, it's interesting. On the one hand, I totally am very deconstructionist. We don't know what the text, you can't say the truth or what the text means. No one knows. And that's a millennial infinite journey trying to discover the infinite word of God, what it means. On the other hand, as far as multiple interpretations, I'm a little bit of a capitalist libertarian. I believe that there's a free market of interpretations, and I can interpret it any way I want, and I can think I'm right, but let's see how everyone else, can I defend my interpretation? Is there depth to my interpretation? And that's why, like Rashi, you have some of the classic midrashim and the classic commentators. They're only classic because they have resonated with the Jewish people and the interpreters over the centuries. So I think it's great to argue it, and everyone should come up with their own interpretations, but it's a free market, and we'll see which interpretation endures and which perhaps is the most meaningful, speaks to the people in any age in the most meaningful way.
I think we're having mind meld, because I was going to say something similar about how, you know, I come from an academic background. So the way I think about it is there is no such thing as reading a text without interpreting it, right? Everybody's reading through various lenses. And I think there's even a hint of that. Preview, next book of Exodus, when Moses goes up Mount Sinai and receives Torah, right? Torah doesn't come directly to Israel. It comes through Moses, and Moses shares it with the people. So interpretation, we might argue, was built right into the system, right into the system.
That's why you call it Pardes.
Okay, so right, Esther is sharing with us, Pardes is this traditional Jewish rubric for interpretation. Pardes is a 4-letter word meaning orchard, Pei, Resh, Daled, Samech, and those it's an acrostic referring to different ways of interpreting things more literally onto more spiritually or more abstractly. So thank you for reminding us of that Judaism has always recognized, right? Also, there are 70 faces of Torah, right? That's what our parent company, 70 Faces Media, takes inspiration in its name from, this idea that there are so many ways to read things. Stuart Wald, you have been waiting patiently. I'm going to give you the last comment, and then we're going to close the program afterward. Would you please come tell us what's on your mind?
I have about a dozen things I could ask about.
Okay.
Gave a whole drosh on comparing Moses to Michael Jordan for the men's club the other night. But the question I have, actually, that I do not have an answer to, that's what I'm asking. Several places, especially in Bereshit, there is a historicity built in where we are told that's why it was called this then, but now we call it something different. Within the text itself, beyond any kind of external interpretation, there is a change in reference in time. Or these are the people who lived there and they didn't have any walls, and now the Philistines are there and they have walls and a lot more stuff. We really wish we had more of that stuff, don't we? What kind of analysis has been done over time at that specific issue? Are we supposed to essentially, well, we're at Sinai getting it, and this is the current view, because again, for many recipients in later dates, it's no longer the name that it was current time Torah, but it's a subsequent name. So, what kind of thought has been given to this by scholars over the ages, if anything?
Are you saying, Stuart, that troubles you? Those comments trouble you in terms of the claim the Torah was? No.
Not at all. I'm not troubled at all.
Yeah.
I just find it, I just find it very interesting that this is not just a narrative, okay, and here's what happened then, but rather, to an extent, the narrator is breaking the fourth wall and is saying, this is what happened then, and here's something else that we can say about it today.
Yeah.
For whatever today is in discussion.
Yeah. Would one of our panelists like to respond to those little comments that we see pop up in Genesis? This place is called, I don't have one at the top of my head, but this place is called this, but it used to be called that. Then the Philistines were in the land, those kind of comments.
Sure.
Chaim is shaking his head there.
Just real quickly, and I'd love to hear what Liana and Rabbi Asher have to say. But I think to Josh's point earlier, we're not the only ones who read Torah in context, right? I mean, to me, and I hadn't thought about this, Josh, until you had made your comment, but it's sort of a reference point in time to say, you mean that event happened here for the people who were reading it then. And I think that's one way of interpreting it. There are other literary reasons that I don't know if Liana or Rabbi Asher want to talk about, but I'll just add that one point that flowed to me out of Josh's earlier question.
Liana, Asher, you want to jump in?
Well, I see Liana has not unmuted herself yet, but it's and look, again, coming from me, I'm from a very orthodox point of view. I'm old-fashioned. I believe the Torah was given at Sinai. It's eternal. It's true. I'll just say two quick things that it reminds me of. That in modern Zionism, coming back to Israel, there's a lot of renaming. And I actually think some of the renaming is even problematic. If we're renaming, villages that had a different name. So I think but I think there's something about a people and a land that it shows a living relationship to the land and to the history that has still been with our people. The other thing that, and this Ethan Davidson pointed out to me once, that the narrator, even from a very traditional point of view, is the narrator always right? I don't know. Is the narrator God? I don't know. Who is the narrator? And is the narrator always omniscient and always right? Maybe, but that's open for interpretation as well.
Rabbi Asher, I think I mentioned I come at this sort of more from an academic sort of side of things. And Stuart, one thing that went through my mind when you were saying this is when we studied this in like university, it is very common to put the Torah alongside ancient Canaanite and Babylonian myths. So you'll see things like, oh, we have the Torah story of Noah and the ark, and then we have other myths about floods that destroyed the world, and then little birds were sent out to see if there was dry land. And there are all these parallels that tell us that that the Torah did not develop in a vacuum, that it is adopting and adapting mythological themes that are in the area. But one thing that makes the Torah different from all of these other ancient myths that really is sort of exciting, interesting to scholars. And this goes back to a scholar in the 20th century named Yechezkel Kaufman, who wrote one of the first people to write a lot about this, is that the Torah has a real sense of history, right? These ancient myths see time as almost cyclical, and don't see time as progressing in a linear fashion. They see this endless cycle of creation and destruction and creation and destruction in the world. And the God of Israel and the experience of Israel is historical. This idea that there is a linear path, that we don't always go backwards, that we move forwards in time, is an incredibly powerful one that quite possibly the Israelite people brought to the world. So I think we are going to, we have 5 minutes left, and we like to close this session with a bracha to mark this occasion of study, and then and for us, so we can look forward to turning to the book of Exodus this weekend with the next parsha. So first, I want to invite Liana to come forward. You can unmute yourself if you're muted, to offer us a bracha. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Did we lose Liana?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I thought
there you are.
I didn't.
I got ahead of myself and put up the wrong text, but go for it, Liana.
I can do it now. For all the Torah you will learn for the rest of the day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
And we all say Amen. Thank you, Liana. And then, as is traditional, when we complete a unit of learning, we are going to say the Hadran prayer. So Rabbi Asher, would you tell us what that is and lead us in that?
Yes. So I want to make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, the Hadran means we will come back to you. And when we study a tractate of Talmud, we say we'll come back to, learning that tractate of Talmud. But when you study a book of now normally it's the oral tradition, these siyumim, but when you study a book of the Bible and you study it with interpretation, as we've discussed here, and with the beautiful depth that we've seen, thank you, Rav Chaim and Liana and Rachel. So when you round out a book of the written tradition with interpretation, then you also do a siyum. You end off, and the Hadran makes total sense. So I'll read the Hadran, and I'll interpret certain parts. But instead of saying Hadran alach Masechet, I'll say Hadran alach Sefer Breshit. So we will come back, and we know we will. It's a year cycle. Whether you do triennial or yearly or whatever, we'll come back. Hadran alach Masechet Breshit ve'Hadrach Alan, you will return to us. Probably Breshit's going to return to us even before we return to Breshit, because when we study Shemot, Exodus, it's going to come back to us. Daitach Alan Masechet Breshit v'Daitach Alan. We're thinking of you, and you're thinking of us. Lo nitnashe minach lo nitnashe minach sefer Breshit, v'lo titnashe minan. We're not going to forget you, and don't forget us. La ba'alma hadei v'la da'ati. Not in this room or the next room. God, let our Torah be our craft, our skill. These are all rabbis who really gave up their lives for Torah, sons of Bar Papa, really tragic, but they continued the tradition that we have today. This is like 1,500, 2,000 years ago. Chanina Bar Papa, Rami Bar Papa, Nachman Bar Papa, Achai Bar Papa, Abba Bar Papa, Rafram Bar Papa, Rachish Bar Papa, Surcha Bar Papa, Ada Bar Papa, Daro Bar Papa. And this is a continuation of Liana's bracha, that Torah should be sweet in our mouths, continue, Harev not in our hearts. Harev not befinu uvioram habeit Israel. Torah should be sweet. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha. Me'oivai tichakmeni mitzvotecha kilam hili libi tamim v'chukecha laman lo imosh le'olam lo eshkach b'chudecha kivam chitani. Through our Torah we have found life. Through the decades, millennia, we've found life. Baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Beautiful verse from Psalms. Blessed art thou, God, teach me your ways. And we are grateful. And grateful for my Jewish learning for doing these siyums, but we're grateful to God. Just a little bit, little edge here to this one, that you allowed us to be part of learning and not just wasting our time. Even though I love watching about the royals, but this really brought it back, reconciliation. Everyone wakes up early. We wake up to Torah and not to Mishigas. We try. Everyone in this world is running somewhere, but hopefully we're running to a place which makes an eternal difference in our world to the positive. Okay, we'll finish off this hadran. Sefer Breshit. To start and to finish them. Lumod, to learn and to teach. To lishmor and to practical, get something practical out of it. Everyone who learns Torah, Yamod, Yamdu, Lanu, Zareinu, Shalo, Yamusha, Torah, Mipinu, Mipia, Zareinu, Anulam, Yikim, Banu, Bid Halechacha, Tancheotcha, the Torah will guide you in your ways. When you go to sleep, your dreams of Torah will protect you. There's so much blessing in the kindness of Torah, and in the strength of Torah. And Adonai owes them, God gives strength to your people. Adonai yivarech amo b'shalom, and bless us with peace. And we'll just, Rachel, can we finish off with the Kaddish?
Go ahead, Rabbi Asher, go for it.
Okay. This is that special Kaddish that we say only when we're really finishing a siyum. And we'll go back to sharing, please, because I don't know, it's a different kind of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. There we go. Almost. And there we go. Thank you. The Alma Dihuati Licharata, in the world that God will make one. Lachaya Metayo Laaske Yaton Lachai Alma. Ulamivne Karted Yerushalayim. L'shachal Hechalei Bigavei L'mechar Puchanan Yochamin Aro L'Tava Puchana Dishmaya L'Atre Yamlichu Shabrichu Malchutein V'Karei. In our lives, V'Chayechon of Yemechon V'Chayinucho B'Yitzir B'Chalav Zman Kariv Nimru Amen. Yeshemei Rambam V'Rach L'Lam U'Me'omayah. Yivarach v'shamal v'yivrav v'yivrav v'naseh v'yivrav 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 shabrichu le'lam go and just add a prayer for all those who are learning Torah. Al Yisrael v'Rabbanan v'al Tamidihom v'al Kol Tamidei Tamidihom v'al Kol Man de'askim be'oraita v'batra Daim v'b'chol atar v'atar yehel lahon l'chon shlam ha'rabachim v'chiz v'rachamei v'chai v'rechem v'zon v'rechei v'chanam v'chadam avdim shmai v'aravim romain yeshlam ha'rama mishmai v'chei tovim aleinu v'chol yisrovim romain oseh shalom rav. God who makes peace in the heavens in merit of our learning Torah and finishing Sefer Breshit, the book of Genesis, please make peace upon us and our entire world. V'imru amen. Let us say amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Asher, Liana. Thank you for bringing us words of Torah today and giving us a chance to reflect back on what we have been studying for the last few months and think a little bit larger and a little bit deeper. And I'm sure I would have loved to sit here and learn more from you for more time, but an hour is what we're at. Thank you to all of you for your comments, for your questions, for your thoughts, for engaging with us, for being with us. If you enjoyed learning with us today, My Jewish Learning has a lot of other learning opportunities. We have a daily Talmud newsletter. We have a weekly Parsha newsletter that is written by one of our wonderful panelists. We have a daily general Jewish learning newsletter. We will share some of that, I think, in a follow-up, along with probably most likely a survey. I think we usually send surveys out after things like this. This was a somewhat experimental event. So we'd love to hear what you thought of it and how it worked for you. Thank you for being here. I'm Rachel Scheinerman, My Jewish Learning, signing off. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks to My Jewish Learning. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, all.
Yes, everyone.
Okay. Yesher koach. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.